What if I told you that one of the world's most powerful nations was born from a single man's impossible dream? A dream so audacious that even his closest allies called him crazy. Today we're diving deep into the extraordinary birth of Pakistan, a story of partition, passion, and the price of freedom that changed the course of history forever. In 1947, the world witnessed one of the most dramatic geopolitical events of the 20th century. But this isn't just another independence story. This is the tale of how 14 million people crossed borders in the largest mass migration in human history, how a nation was carved out of pure determination, and how one man's vision literally redrew the map of South Asia. I'm about to take you on a journey through the blood, sweat, and tears that created Pakistan. From the smoky rooms where destiny was decided to the railway stations where families were torn apart forever. This is the complete, unvarnished truth about Pakistan's birth. Our story begins with Muhammad Ali Jinnah. But here's what most people don't know. Jinnah wasn't always the champion of Pakistan. In fact, he was once called the ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity. So what transformed this secular lawyer into the architect of partition? The answer lies in the early 1900s, when Jinnah witnessed something that would haunt him forever. As Muslims were increasingly marginalized in a Hindu-majority India, Jinnah saw the writing on the wall. But the British weren't listening, and neither was the Indian National Congress. Here's the kicker. Jinnah almost gave up politics entirely. He moved to London in 1930, ready to abandon the cause. But fate had other plans. A group of Muslim students tracked him down and convinced him to return. That decision would change everything. When Jinnah returned to India in 1934, he found a community in crisis. Muslims made up 25% of the population, but held less than 5% of government positions. The writing was crystal clear. In a democratic India, Muslims would become a permanent minority. But here's where it gets interesting. Jinnah didn't immediately call for partition. Instead, he proposed something revolutionary, the Lahore Resolution of 1940. This wasn't just a political document. It was a declaration that Muslims were not a minority, but a separate nation altogether. The British were skeptical. Gandhi was furious. Even many Muslims thought Jinnah had lost his mind. But Jinnah had seen something others couldn't: the future. And that future required sacrifice on an unimaginable scale. The real turning point came in 1946 with something called Direct Action Day. What was supposed to be a peaceful demonstration turned into one of the bloodiest communal riots in Indian history. In Calcutta alone, over 4,000 people died in just 4 days. But here's what's rarely discussed. This tragedy actually accelerated the partition process. The British, already exhausted from World War II, realized they couldn't maintain control over an increasingly divided India. Lord Mountbatten was brought in with one mission: get Britain out of India as fast as possible. The deadline? August 15, 1947. Just 10 months to divide a subcontinent that had been unified for centuries. What could possibly go wrong? Now comes the part that will give you chills. The Radcliffe Line, the border that would separate India and Pakistan, was drawn by a British lawyer who had never set foot in India before. Sir Cyril Radcliffe had just 5 weeks to divide 450 million people, 175,000 square miles, and centuries of shared history. The result? Pure chaos. Families woke up to find their homes on the wrong side of the border. Sikhs discovered their holiest sites. We're now in Pakistan. Muslims found themselves stranded in India. The human cost was staggering. Between 200,000 to 2 million people died in the violence that followed. But here's the remarkable part. Despite the bloodshed, despite the chaos, despite the seemingly impossible odds, Pakistan was born on August 14, 1947. Jinnah's impossible dream had become reality. The first challenge wasn't political. It was existential. Pakistan inherited just 17% of British India's resources, but had to care for millions of refugees. The new nation had no capital, no infrastructure, and no time to build either. Here's a staggering fact that puts everything in perspective. Pakistan received only 750 crores out of India's total reserves of 4,000 crores. Even worse, India initially refused to transfer this amount, forcing Pakistan to literally beg for its rightful share. Imagine trying to run a country when you can't even access your own treasury. Karachi, a port city of 400,000, suddenly had to accommodate over 1 million refugees. Refugee camps stretched for miles. Families lived in railway stations, under bridges, anywhere they could find shelter. The government operated out of converted military barracks. Jinnah himself worked from a cramped office, often late into the night, trying to build a nation from scratch. The refugee crisis was beyond anything the world had seen before. Entire train compartments arrived, filled with corpses. Women and children walked for days with nothing but the clothes on their backs. The stories from those early days would break your heart. Families separated forever, children who never found their parents, entire communities wiped out overnight. But here's what's remarkable. Despite the chaos, despite having no resources, despite the world betting against them, Pakistanis didn't give up. They shared whatever little they had. Mosques became refugee centers, schools became hospitals, and ordinary citizens became heroes. But tragedy struck early. Just 13 months after independence, Jinnah died. The father of the nation was gone, leaving behind a country still finding its feet. His death wasn't just the loss of a leader, it was the loss of the one person who could hold the country together through sheer force of personality. What followed was a period of political instability that would define Pakistan for decades. Here's something most people don't realize. Pakistan took 9 years to write its first constitution. 9 years. During this time, the country had 7 different prime ministers. The political musical chairs had begun, and it wouldn't stop anytime soon. The real issue wasn't just political incompetence. It was a fundamental disagreement about what Pakistan should be. Should it be an Islamic state or a secular democracy? Should Urdu be the national language, ignoring Bengali speakers who made up the majority? These weren't just political questions. They were existential crises. The language issue proved particularly explosive. When the government declared Urdu as the sole national language in 1948, East Pakistan erupted in protests. This decision would plant the seeds for a tragedy that would unfold 23 years later. By 1958, Pakistan's civilian government had collapsed into chaos. That's when General Ayub Khan stepped in with the country's first military coup. Here's the twist. Many Pakistanis actually welcomed it. After years of political instability, military rule seemed like a breath of fresh air. Ayub Khan modernized the economy, built infrastructure, and brought stability. For a brief moment, Pakistan was actually growing faster than India. But military rule came with a price. Democracy was suspended, and political dissent was crushed. The 1960s became known as Pakistan's golden decade, but beneath the surface, tensions were building. East Pakistan felt increasingly marginalized, and the seeds of separation were taking root. Then came 1971, the year that broke. What started as demands for greater autonomy in East Pakistan escalated into a full-blown independence movement. The Pakistani military's response was brutal, leading to what many historians call genocide. The numbers are staggering. Between 300,000 to 3 million people died. 10 million refugees fled to India. And when India finally intervened, Pakistan's military was overwhelmed in just 13 days. On December 16, 1971, Pakistan surrendered in Dhaka. East Pakistan became Bangladesh, and Pakistan lost more than half its population. It was the most devastating defeat in the country's history, and it changed everything. But here's where Pakistan's story gets truly remarkable. Instead of collapsing, the country reinvented itself. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, a charismatic leader from Sindh, took power with a promise to rebuild Pakistan from the ashes. Bhutto launched ambitious social programs, nationalized major industries, and gave Pakistan a new constitution in 1973. But more importantly, He gave Pakistanis something they desperately needed: hope. However, Bhutto's democratic experiment was cut short in 1977 when General Zia-ul-Haq staged another military coup. What followed was 11 years of military rule that would transform Pakistan's social and political landscape forever. Zia's most controversial decision came in the 1980s when he accelerated Pakistan's nuclear program. The world watched nervously as Pakistan raced toward becoming an atomic power. The motivation was simple. After losing East Pakistan, the country was determined never to be militarily vulnerable again. On May 28, 1998, Pakistan conducted its first nuclear tests, becoming the world's 7th nuclear power and the first Muslim nation to achieve nuclear capability. The celebrations in Karachi and Lahore were unprecedented, but the international isolation that followed was severe. The 1990s brought democracy back to Pakistan, but it was a turbulent decade. The country saw 4 different governments, each dismissed before completing its term. Benazir Bhutto and Nawaz Sharif alternated in power, but neither could solve Pakistan's fundamental problems. Corruption, economic stagnation, and political instability. The decade ended with yet another military coup in 1999 when General Pervez Musharraf seized power. Once again, Pakistan's democratic experiment had failed, and the military was back in charge. September 11, 2001, changed everything for Pakistan. Overnight, the country found itself on the front lines of America's war on terror. Musharraf's decision to ally with the United States brought billions in aid, but also unleashed forces that Pakistan is still struggling to control. Now, Pakistan was caught in an impossible position. Say no to America and face isolation and potential bombing. Say yes and face civil war at home. Musharraf chose America, but the price was devastating. The war in Afghanistan spilled over into Pakistan's tribal areas. These mountainous regions, which had never been fully under government control, became battlegrounds. The Pakistani military launched operation after operation, but the militants kept coming back. Then came the drone strikes, over 400 of them during the Obama administration alone. Each strike killed militants, but also innocent civilians. Each civilian death created 10 more enemies. Pakistan was fighting a war within its own borders, and the cost in blood and treasure was enormous. The statistics are mind-numbing. Over 80,000 Pakistanis died in terrorist attacks between 2001 and 2018. The economic cost exceeded $150 billion. Major cities like Karachi, Lahore, and Islamabad lived under constant threat. Children grew up knowing the sound of bomb blasts, and families learned to live with fear as a daily companion. But the most tragic part? Pakistan was fighting America's war while being blamed for not doing enough. The same country that had lost more soldiers than all NATO forces combined in Afghanistan was constantly criticized for harboring terrorists. Just when you think Pakistan's challenges couldn't get worse, nature itself seemed to turn against the country. In 2005, a devastating earthquake in Kashmir killed over 75,000 people and left 3.5 million homeless. But that was just the beginning. The 2010 floods were biblical in scale. Literally 1/5 of the entire country was underwater. 20 million people were affected, more than the populations of many European countries. Entire villages vanished overnight. The Indus River, Pakistan's lifeline, became a monster that devoured everything in its. But here's what the world didn't see: how Pakistanis responded to these disasters. Neighbors helped neighbors. Strangers became family. The same people who had little to begin with shared whatever they could. Pakistani diaspora around the world sent money home. Cricket players donated match fees. Even children broke their piggy banks to help flood victims. These disasters revealed something profound about Pakistan's character. This is a nation that refuses to stay down. Every time nature or politics or economics knocked it to its knees, it got back up, dusted itself off, and kept moving forward. Today's Pakistan is a complex mix of promise and peril. The country has successfully transitioned to civilian rule, with multiple peaceful transfers of power since 2008. The economy shows signs of growth, and a young, educated middle class is emerging. Pakistan's youth bulge is staggering. 64% of the population is under 30. This could be a demographic dividend or a disaster, depending on whether the country can provide education and jobs for these young people. The startup ecosystem is booming, with companies like Kareem and Daraz showing that Pakistani entrepreneurs can compete globally. The country has also made remarkable progress in some areas. Polio, which once paralyzed thousands of Pakistani children, is now confined to just a few districts. The Benazir Income Support Program has lifted millions out of extreme poverty. Mobile banking has revolutionized financial inclusion in rural areas. But challenges remain enormous. Corruption continues to plague institutions, with Pakistan ranking poorly on global transparency indices. Religious extremism threatens social fabric, with minorities facing increasing persecution. Economic inequality is growing, with the richest 1% controlling 9% of total income while millions struggle in poverty. Climate change poses an existential threat. Pakistan contributes less than 1% of global carbon emissions, but is among the countries most vulnerable to climate change. Glaciers in the north are melting rapidly, threatening water security for 200 million people. And the relationship with India remains tense, with both countries possessing nuclear weapons. The 2019 Balakot airstrikes brought the two nuclear powers to the brink of war. Social media warfare has replaced dialogue, and nationalism on both sides makes peace increasingly difficult. Perhaps the most significant development in recent years has been Pakistan's partnership with China. The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, part of China's Belt and Road Initiative, promises $62 billion in investment. It could transform Pakistan's economy, but it also raises questions about sovereignty and debt. So here we are, 76 years after that impossible dream became reality. Pakistan's journey has been marked by extraordinary triumphs and devastating tragedies. It's a nation that has survived partition, wars, coups, and terrorism. It's been written off countless times, yet it endures. The story of Pakistan is ultimately a story about human resilience. It's about 230 million people who refuse to give up on the dream of a better tomorrow. It's about a nation that continues to struggle with its identity, but never stops trying to fulfill its potential. From Jinnah's impossible dream to today's complex reality, Pakistan's story is far from over. The next chapter is being written right now, and despite all the challenges, one thing remains certain: Pakistan's story is one of the most fascinating tales of the modern world. What do you think? Is Pakistan's greatest chapter still ahead of it? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories from history that shaped our world.